Welcome, everyone, and good evening. So nice to be here together, practicing, taking care of our lives in this way, this beautiful way of the Dhamma. I'm Ayya Dhammadipa, and this is the Tuesday Tune-In. And that means that we'll have our first part of our program will be a brief guided meditation. And then I will offer some Dhamma reflection. And then we'll turn off the recording at that point and have some time for sharing and questions and answers. So to settle us in this evening, I thought that we'd do an abbreviated version of the 4 elements practice. So you can just begin to tune in to the body, supported by your seat. Relaxing the belly and allowing the body to settle right here, right now. And moving the attention up the spine, really allowing those bones to come into alignment. All the way up through the neck and the head. Allowing the eyes to also soften and rest. Now moving the attention to the crown of the head. And just knowing the presence of the earth element. So we know actually that there is earth in every cell of the body. So you can begin to move the attention from the crown of the head downward. Slowly just acknowledging the presence of earth as this body. Also attending to the earth element in the arms. Just slowly moving the attention at your own pace. And because the body is pervaded by earth, has those qualities of earth. Firmness, stability. By now, perhaps in the lower part of the torso and the hips. And also scanning the legs, knowing earth as this body. And eventually coming to the feet. Every cell pervaded by earth element. Natural stability. And then opening up the attention to the whole body, knowing the whole body as earth. And now the attention moving to the crown of the head again. And this time, knowing the presence of the air element. So we know that there is oxygen in every cell of the body. So again, slowly, slowly moving the attention downward. Just acknowledging, just knowing the presence of the air element throughout the body. remembering to move the attention through the arms, aware of this body as air. Moving down the torso and eventually arriving at the hips, whole body pervaded by air, spaciousness, movement, lightness. And then making your way down the legs, and eventually opening the attention to the whole body at once. Knowing air as this body, air throughout this body. And now opening to the elements beyond the body, externally. First, becoming aware of the earth element beneath you. Earth in the form of whatever you're sitting on. Floor beneath you. And eventually, somewhere beneath that, the planet. Knowing that the earth element internally and the earth externally are basically the same. And next, becoming aware of the air element. So air around you, air above you. And knowing that the air element externally and the air element internally are basically the same. that was our meditation practice for this evening. And as usual, if you have any kinds of questions or comments about that, we can talk about that after the Dhamma talk. And so at this moment, I'm going to go ahead and transition to that part of the evening. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. This evening, as I mentioned last week, I'm going to be continuing this evening with our series on the 7 factors of awakening. The Pali word is bojjhanga. And the 7 factors are really an important part of what sets Buddhism apart from all other philosophies and forms, ways of thinking about the possibilities of a human life, I think. And so last week, I spoke about mindfulness. It's the first of the 7. I'm just going to run through the 7, and then I'll talk about the second one in more detail. So mindfulness, investigation of principles. That's our topic for this evening. And then we have energy or effort, and joy, and tranquility or calm. We have concentration and equanimity. Those are the 7 factors. And there's actually a particular sutta in which you can think about them as sequentially developing. But oftentimes I think what people experience is that they are developing at different periods of time, sometimes all at the same time, or sometimes a group of factors at once. And but it is important for them to all come together in order for that all of the proper supports for realization to be present. And so this evening, yes, I'm going to speak about investigation of principles. So principles is a way that I'm choosing this evening to translate this word Dhamma. So Dhamma can mean the teachings in general. It can mean the reality to which the teachings point. It can mean the law or the truth of things. But it also can mean just phenomena, can mean things or stuff. And then again, this particular word, principles, meaning something like the mechanisms or the way that things work. That is also the Dhamma. So investigation is a principle that is a necessary part of the path, something that we are encouraged to develop. Investigation. And investigation relies on the presence of mindfulness. So mindfulness is really the basis for investigation to occur. And that is because, as I said last week, we can't really even be present for phenomena or principles of phenomena until we are mindful of them. If you're not mindful of the principles or the phenomena that are happening in your life, then what you're really interacting with, or what you're really mostly experiencing, is your ideas about them rather than the things themselves. So mindfulness is a way of having this attentiveness in the present moment to phenomena with a kind of receptive, non-judgmental way of attending to them. Yeah? So what's the difference between that and investigation, you might ask, right? So how do we then understand the difference here? And I would suggest that investigation is different in a number of ways. One of the ways that it's different is that investigation goes out more. It's a more active quality. Yeah. So mindfulness is this kind of receptive presence, and investigation is a more active going to the thing, if you will, whatever the thing is that you're investigating, whether that be a thought, some kind of physical sensation, something externally, right? Part of the reason why we did the meditation we did today is that we could begin to train the mind to understand how to observe internally, internal phenomena, and also observe external phenomena, and perhaps begin to relate them, to learn about that. It's the relationship there. And so that's another aspect, another difference of investigation from mindfulness. So investigation enables us to see something about causality, and it enables us to see something about the interrelationships between phenomena, because there's an aspect of discernment about it. So mindfulness, when we say mindfulness is a non-judgmental quality, it means that it has less of that discernment. So to illustrate this, I brought some actual illustrations. And Dave, I don't know if you want to move over here so you can see, or you can sit over there. But I'm going to share my screen, which I don't often do, but I'm going to do it tonight because I have some actual images that I would like to share with you. And let's see if I can get this to come up now. So there's that stuff. And unfortunately, I closed them. Okay, so here they are. So this first one is mindfulness. So these are some paintings that I did while I was on a solitary retreat a number of years back. And I was, during the first week of retreat, as sometimes happens, I was kind of grappling with the hindrances. But then once the hindrances had started to subside, then I thought, oh, it would be, so I painted the hindrances, my ideas of what the hindrances look like. And then I said, well, maybe it would be a good idea to also paint the factors of awakening. And it was a very good learning for me. It was actually one of the very interesting times of thinking about what we mean by these different things. So what's happening here in this image is that you have a tree. This is the actual tree here on the right-hand side. And you see that there's ground and tree and some different colored leaves on the tree. And then you have this yellow thing. This is the mind. And so the image of tree appears in the mind, or the knowing of tree, you could say, appears in the mind. And it's pretty similar. There's not a lot of distortion or a lot of comparison. It's just the tree itself. This is mindfulness. So mindfulness means that the tree comes into knowing awareness. Again, this is the tree on the right, the actual tree, and the ground underneath it, and some different colored leaves. And then this yellow represents the mind, and the knowing of the tree pretty clearly in the mind. There's not, it might be an imperfect image. As you see, it's not exactly the same thing, but nonetheless, it is approximately the tree without much else, just the knowing of it. And then I'm going to bring up another image. So let's get this a little bit bigger there. Okay, great. So this is the image of investigation. So what's happening here? What's the difference? So one thing is that you have the sense doors are noticing different aspects of the object itself. So the eye can see leaves, can see the color of the leaves, the shapes of the leaves, and so on, and would maybe make a discernment about that. Oh, the leaves on this tree are different than the leaves on the tree next to it. Or the leaves on this tree are new because it's spring. And a few weeks ago, the tree didn't have any leaves because it was winter still. Or the hand can say, oh, we can touch the tree and we can feel the texture of the tree. Right? So different kinds of contact can happen more actively, interacting with this thing and getting to know it. Right? And interestingly, what happened for me also, which was where I learned something about why it is that investigation helps us to see causality, is that when you investigate the tree, then you also notice that if there is sunlight, there is the shadow of the tree. So it's not just a tree. If there are certain conditions together with tree, then you also have this other condition present called shadow. You see? And if you don't have a lot of sunlight, maybe it's a cloudy day, or maybe it's nighttime or whatever, then no shadow. So you can start to, by your investigation, also notice differences across time. This is how we tell time, right? You look in the mirror one year and you don't have gray hair, and you look in the mirror the next year and you have gray hair, you have missing hair, right? So these are the kinds of things that investigation is enabling, right? So that is a little bit of a way of telling the difference between these two qualities, factors of awakening. And so there are some ways that we usually talk about the supporting principles, supporting factors for investigation. What are the things that help you to be able to do this? It's kind of interesting what the commentaries come up with here. So what the Buddha described in the sutta, there's a sutta, let me see which number it is, so you guys know in case you want to go look it up. You have in the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses, there's a whole chapter on the Bojjhangas, on the 7 factors of awakening. So there's all kinds of suttas with different types of teachings around it. And there's one particular one that I find helpful, which is, this is 46, number 51. So chapter 46 is the chapter on the 7 factors of awakening. And it's number 51 in that chapter, in which the Buddha speaks about what are the things that are the nutriments, the nourishing, the things that nourish the hindrances, right? The things that get in the way, obstacles. I love how we translate it out in Spanish as obstáculos, so that you really get the sense of like them being things that get in the way of clear seeing or clear knowing. But, and also what are the things that de-nourish or don't nourish, help you to take away the nourishment from the hindrances. And then the sutta goes on to say what are the nourishments or the nutriments for the seven enlightenment factors. And so the nutriment for the arising of what Bhikkhu Bodhi here, so I'm using the Bhikkhu Bodhi translation, this big, beautiful tome. He's done all the books, thankfully. Thank you, Bhante. He calls it discrimination of states, right? And I'm calling it investigation of principles or investigation of phenomena. What is it that is the nutriment for the arising of investigation and for the fulfillment of it to develop it once it's already arisen? And what the Buddha said in this particular sutta is there are wholesome and unwholesome states, blamable and blameless states. And by blamable and blameless, it means like things that would get you in trouble with the law. That's the kind of more or less the meaning of that. Inferior and superior states, meaning in terms of like spiritually advanced or spiritually not so aware. And then dark and bright states, which is, I believe, a sort of reference to karma, right? Usually the Buddha would speak about dark karma and bright karma, things that are likely to give us, an impetus toward a bright future, or things that would give us an impetus toward a dark future. It's one way to think about that in contemporary language. And then he says, frequently giving attention to them, these different types of states, that is the nutriment of the arising and the nutriment for the development of the investigation. So what does that mean? So that's going back to what I was saying earlier about discernment. Yeah, that our capability, our capacity for discernment of difference can be used to create this quality of investigation. Just as I was saying a moment ago, we can look at the tree, we can look at the leaves on the tree, and we can discern, oh, the leaves on this tree are different than the leaves on that tree. Or the leaves on the tree this week are different than the leaves were a week ago. Mm-hmm. And that kind of discernment, or as the Buddha is saying here, also discernment of different types of states in our mind, states in our bodies, right? Wholesome thoughts versus unwholesome thoughts. When we can make those kinds of distinctions, we can use that to our benefit. We can use that to our benefit to investigate how does it work, not to use it as a stick, not to use your practice as a way to beat yourself over the head, but to use it as a way to begin to understand how does it work? What is the mechanism at work here? So some of you have also heard me use this metaphor or this story of Sir Isaac Newton. So Isaac Newton was an Englishman who was very famous for having developed calculus and having thereby understood gravity, the principles, been able to describe in mathematical terms gravity. And that happened because, as the story goes, there was an apple that fell on him or near him. Yeah. And rather than eat the apple or curse the apple or kick the apple or give the apple to his teacher or whatever it was, he turned and said, why does the apple fall? How does the apple fall? Why does it go from above to below every time? And he turned to what's the mechanism at work, using exactly the same phenomena. It's not that he set up some special experiment. He just used the phenomena that was right in front of him to study the mechanism. And that is also what Buddhism is asking us to do. It's asking us to look carefully, to receive, that's the mindfulness part, and then to investigate carefully. Investigate carefully. Even the things that you think you already know. So it's not a surprise that there's a shadow under the tree. But to learn something about how it is that that's perceived and the conditionality that's inherent in that, that's a helpful thing to do. That's a helpful thing to do. And in fact, we could say that if you fully penetrate the conditionality of any one experience, fully penetrate it, you can learn about how all things work. Because the way that all things work is that they are impermanent. They are in a constant state of flux. And they are in a constant state, a particular kind of flux based upon the groupings of conditions that are present in any particular moment. Not just random flux. So that is a very interesting thing to study. That is a very interesting thing to bring your investigative capabilities to. So in terms of some of the other factors that are helpful, there are a few more factors that are mentioned, again, in the commentaries, not directly in the sutta here. But So there are said to be 7 other conditions that are helpful for the arising of investigation. So I just want to say, because I don't know that I mentioned this part last week, so I'll say this also. There are 4 conditions, other conditions for the arising of mindfulness, besides the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is the basic way that it's understood. There's clear comprehension in all activities, avoiding unmindful people and associating with mindful people. In other words, having good role models around you, if you can. And right resolution, which Bhikkhu Bodhi clarifies as a mind that inclines toward establishing mindfulness, something about kind of leaning into, maybe leaning into isn't a good phrase for that, but something about being willing, being open to it, opening ourselves to that inclination to be mindful, to be present for what is. So then the 7 other conditions for the arising of investigation. So one is asking about the meaning of the teachings. And this is important. There's a very interesting way to think about it. So what this is suggesting is that first you need to, or perhaps not first, but at some point you need to have a sense of the frameworks, have a sense of what the teaching is, even if you haven't experienced it yet. So this is very interestingly saying that it's useful to have an idea about it. The idea is not the thing itself. It's not the ultimate goal, but it's still useful to have an idea about it. In the same way that perhaps Isaac Newton had some idea about, maybe there is some kind of principle that can be drawn mathematically that makes the apple fall. How about that? Yeah. So that's the first of the additional conditions besides this kind of discernment that the sutta mentions. Then you have this funny one, personal cleanliness. What on earth does personal cleanliness have anything to do with investigation? I have to say, I don't know. I think it's very funny. It's one of those places in the suttas where I'm sort of like, that's very silly. Unless it's talking literally like you need to wash your eyes enough to be able to see. You need to have to have your mouth clean enough that you can taste something. I mean, that would be my supposition about what that means, because other than that, when I think about investigation, I don't really think so much about personal hygiene. It doesn't really go together very well. But maybe he meant it in that kind of very crude way. Huh? Which would actually make sense, sort of, in the context of the kind of extreme ascetic practices that the Buddha had done before he came to the middle way. He wasn't washing his eyes or brushing his teeth or doing any of these things for very, very long periods of time. And maybe he realized, wow, I need to be able to take care of these things if I'm going to understand the taste of something or be able to see the colors on the trees. Anyway, that's a funny one. And then you have balancing the faculties. So again, the faculties include mindfulness. The spiritual faculties include mindfulness, concentration, energy. So we'll get to some of these because they're going to come up later in the 7 factors. I'm not going to go through all of the faculties today. But this sense of balance, this sense of not pushing too hard, but also not being totally checked out, but really applying ourselves in a balanced kind of way. That's important. And then reflecting on the sphere of deep knowledge. So this is kind of an interesting one. I really like this one. And for this one, I want to tell you a little story. I want to tell you a story that I wrote in my blog almost 10 years ago now, which was it's a metaphor for the entirety of the path. But I think that in this story, this metaphor, that you'll see that there are various points of investigation. And I'll try to point them out again after I read it to you. It's very short. I'm just going to read it to you, and then we can talk about it a little bit later if you want to. So again, this is a fictional story. This is just a Buddhist parable, if you will, that I wrote a number of years ago. Imagine you are standing in the ocean. Your feet and legs are immersed in the water, which is moving to its natural rhythms. You stand there feeling the wetness against your skin and the motion. You're searching for something. Surely there must be something more to this experience, you think to yourself. You yearn to understand, to see more than you can see at that moment. Then you notice someone who is standing in the ocean also, and you approach them. They look no different from you, but for some reason you suspect that they may know more about this. So you stand a little closer to them, and you try to ask a question, but you're not sure what it is you want to know about exactly. The person looks at you and tells you that the ocean tastes salty, that is entirely made of salt water. You hear this and you think you understand it. Eventually, you realize that you too are also made of salt water. This must be the thing that you were searching for. But the fact is that you don't really know anything about salt water because you've never tasted it. So you begin to ask questions about what salt water tastes like, and you begin to daydream about what it must taste like. And the person standing next to you tells you all about the taste of salt water, making up all kinds of poetic ways of describing the taste so that you might understand. However, until you actually drink from the ocean, until you actually swallow a mouthful of salt water, you will never really know the taste of the ocean. There's nothing stopping you from tasting the ocean, not that person, not the ocean itself, not your body, not your mind. One day you are able to scoop up a bit of salt water in your hand and take a taste. It is completely new to you, and yet nothing special. Now you know your own taste in a new way, and you know the taste of everything around you. Now you know the same thing that the other person knows. You know that the taste has been there all along, within you and without, and yet you simply couldn't imagine it. You know that the person was describing it accurately now that you've tasted it too. Knowing in this way, everything has changed, and yet you are still simply standing in the ocean. So there are various points in this story that are about investigation. The point at which you notice that there is somebody else standing in the ocean. The point at which you begin to think about what that person said. Try to understand it in your own experience. You have that idea, oh yes, of course, it's me. But then you also realize by investigation that there's something missing about that conceptual knowledge. The only way you would know that is by investigation. So then you go further, you learn a little bit more, you see what needs to be done, you hear a little bit more about it. Okay? You ask for those teachings. You ask, what does it taste like? What is it really like? But sooner or later, you have to go beyond that and actually taste it. And that is also a point of investigation, right? So there's the point at which the person knows that they are made of salt water, but they have to go beyond that. They have to continue investigating that idea in lived reality. This is why in the suttas we see that when this kind of experience is spoken about, it's called kayena pusitva. It's called having touched it with the body, having had a visceral experience. Or as my friend Bhante Sudatta likes to say, like knowing it in your bones. So this is the purpose of investigation. This is how investigation arises. This is how we go from this very same lived body and mind experience in ignorance to this very same lived body and mind experience in wisdom, in awakening, in realization of what it really is, how it really works. So if you come away with nothing tonight, I would ask you to come away with only one thing, perhaps, rather than nothing, and that would be keep checking it out. Even the things that you think you know, keep investigating.